This question came from Soka, who asks, what would the world be like if the land masses were arranged as they are now, but rotated 90 degrees? This would
Quiet on set
significantly change our world as a whole and
and
the
action.
strange world of cinema in the 1990s, particularly focused around Minnesota. To clarify, we do not change the tilt of the Earth's axis relative to the Sun. We imagine that the Earth's surface is shifted by 90 degrees, placing the land currently at our poles on the equator. We will choose the Greenwich Meridian as our new equator. Thus, the Indian Ocean will be at the North Pole, and the coast of Ecuador will be at the South Pole. Let's imagine that this alternative Earth develops over millions of years, allowing time for ecosystems and climate zones to form. Where will the deserts and forests be, where one can go for a beach holiday or chase tornadoes? This topic is complex as the climate heavily depends on the details of ocean currents and atmospheric heat circulation, but we can make some broad assumptions based on general principles of climate physics. The main driver of our weather and climate is the sun, which delivers more heat at the equator than at the poles. Hot air rises at the equator and moves towards the poles. Then cooler air moves along the surface back to the equator. This circulation is called the Hadley cell. For various complex reasons, the Earth does not have just one atmospheric cell in each hemisphere. We actually have 3 Hadley cells, Farmer cells, and polar cells. Let's assume that in our tilted world, the situation is similar. This means it will have temperature extremes similar to ours. This is what the map of our tilted Earth will look like. We will add some ice and frost near the poles and in mountainous areas. Next, we need to mark green zones and deserts. Their placement heavily depends on the amount of precipitation. Therefore, we will need to outline some wind patterns. Due to the Coriolis effect, surface winds in the Hadley cell blow not only towards the equator, but also from east to west. In temperate zones, prevailing surface winds blow from west to east, and at times, east-west winds circulate around the poles. So, let's outline some wind patterns, keeping in mind that it would actually be even more complicated due to interactions with land and the positioning of permanent high and low pressure areas. The rising air at the equator carries moisture from the ocean, which then condenses into precipitation. Therefore, tropical regions are typically humid and densely vegetated. The descending air is cold and dry. Thus, the land under the outer edges of Hadley cells is usually dry. These regions, located just south of 30 degrees, are known as horse latitudes for some reason. In temperate zones, the situation is more variable, as farming cells are not as strong as Hadley cells. The weather there is determined by the movement of jet streams and fronts, and also depends on geography. For fun, let's imagine where hurricane zones might be located, and let's also fantasize about what time zones might look like. New York, for example, remains in its time zone and is still subject to hurricanes. Sorry. Let's take a closer look at each continent. The climate of North America is similar to the previous one, but flipped along the north-south axis. Central America is now icy and polar, while Arctic Canada becomes tropical. Hurricanes threaten Greenland, Baffin Island, and maritime territories. Tropical moisture from the Bering Sea and the former North Atlantic Ocean mixes with cold air descending from the Rocky Mountains, creating a new tornado zone in the prairies east of Hudson Bay. South America resembles old Europe. On the Brazilian coast, it is cool and moderate, while across the width of the continent, there are steppes and boreal forests. In the south, boreal vegetation gives way to polar tundra, and then to the vast icy Andes, which separate the continent from the frozen polar waters. The Amazon, which in our world carries more water than the next 7 rivers combined, has shrunk and become something like the Mississippi. Asia is flipped just like North America, and now the Siberian coast faces an isolated tropical sea. The Indian subcontinent and former Southeast Asia form a new Siberia. The Gobi is no longer in the shadow of the Himalayan ranges, but it is not becoming tropical either. Europe resembles old Southeast Asia. Great Britain and Ireland look like the islands of Sumatra and Borneo. Iceland resembles our Philippines, while Central Europe becomes a new New Guinea, where the Alps are the only place on the equator with permanent glaciers. Africa is rotated 90 degrees. Former West Africa becomes a tropical forest, and former East Africa becomes a dry desert. On our Earth, North America has the highest number of tornadoes among all continents. But in this world, I am sure they will also be frequent in Africa. Australia is becoming cooler and wetter with forests along once dry western regions. But Antarctica is the undisputed winner. Without its icy cover, it is slightly smaller than we remember, but much of it is covered with high-altitude tropical forests. Around the mountains to the south and west are alpine zones. Researchers on the McMurdo and Ross Islands work in a tropical paradise. If anyone among them decides they miss the frozen wastelands, they can always apply for a transfer to Costa Rica. Now let's see how things are with the largest cities in the world. Some are getting colder. Mexico City, located high in the polar mountains, finds itself under an ice cover. Jakarta becomes the new Spitsbergen, a desolate coastal cliff too far north for even most Norwegians to feel comfortable. Calcutta and Delhi are frozen, isolated from the warmer world by the Himalayas. Hong Kong, Manila, Karachi, and Mumbai resemble our peaceful Anchorage or Reunion. The ocean is not completely frozen, but quite cold. Many cities remain comfortable to live in, although with some changes. Seoul, Osaka, Tokyo, Shanghai, and New York are among the least affected by climate change, remaining generally similar to their former selves. In Shanghai, it is indeed getting colder, but seasonal extremes in all 5 cities are becoming less pronounced, especially in Seoul, and significantly more humid. Cairo has shifted slightly south. It is now surrounded by coastal savanna, and in the Nile Delta area, patches of tropical forest can be found. In São Paulo and Buenos Aires, the temperature has slightly decreased. Their climate is somewhere between old New England and traditional English climate. Los Angeles remains pleasant and mild. The constant sea breeze bringing moisture to the San Gabriel Mountains makes Los Angeles one of the rainiest places in the new America, resembling a wetter version of our Seattle. Meanwhile, some cities are becoming significantly hotter. Moscow becomes extremely hot and very dry, with a climate reminiscent of a combination of our Phoenix and Baghdad. London finds itself in sweltering jungles with a climate similar to Bangkok. Sharp curries have now become completely appropriate. The temperature is full of piranhas. This is the only place on Earth where tigers apologize before attacking you. At the beginning, I mentioned the influence of the cinema of the 90s. To explain, let's consider another scenario. What if such a change happened on our planet instantly, rather than naturally over millions of years? We assume that all materials magically shift, so there are no giant tsunamis or earthquakes. Nevertheless, it would still be a catastrophe. Ice caps would have melted long before new ones could form, raising ocean levels by several hundred feet. The rearrangement of climate zones would shock the biosphere, causing ecological chaos and possibly mass extinctions. But if the changes had happened, as they should, and if the story were told by Michael Bay, then as the waters of the Gulf of Mexico began to cool and the Mississippi slowed down and became an estuary, the wildlife of the region would spread deep into the country. And one morning, all those characters we know from 90s movies woke up to the sight of floating rafts with fiery ants, followed by 5 million lost hungry alligators sprawled on the now melted Mighty Ducks ice rink. This would provide even more reasons for complaints from the characters in The Old Fools and lead to a similarly grim, albeit more reptilian ending for the film Fargo.